October 23, 1944. Zuid-Beveland Isthmus, Netherlands. Wind lashes across the flooded polders like a living thing, carrying the sour smell of rotting reeds and salt water pushed inland by weeks of rain. The moon is smothered behind a drifting sheet of clouds, and the only light comes from the faint glow of distant tracer fire. Private Alan Mercer, 18th Field Company, 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, braces himself against the cold as he squints across the marshlands. His boots are already sinking. Every step makes a sickening slurp, as if the earth itself is trying to pull him under. Behind him, the rest of the sapper section struggles to haul crates of pickets and planks salvaged from a drowned farmhouse. Somewhere ahead, a man screams, a short, panicked cry that cuts off too suddenly. Lieutenant Gordon Blythe freezes. "Hold," he whispers sharply. "No one moves until I say." Silence falls, except for the groan of wind sweeping across the half-submerged fields. From the darkness, two sappers arrive breathlessly. "It's Grover, sir," one pants. "He stepped into a hole. He's up to his chest, sinking fast." Blythe doesn't hesitate. "Get ropes, spread your weight, crawl, don't walk." This is the Scheldt, a battlefield unlike anything Canadians have faced before. Not sand, not rubble, but waterlogged clay that behaves like a liquid trap. German soldiers of the 70th Infantry Division, veterans of this island warfare, nicknamed these marshes Das Schlammfeld, the mud field. They knew its dangers. They avoided its worst pockets. They had mapped every treacherous ditch. The Canadians had not. Blythe drops to his hands and knees, crawling through ice-cold mud that sucks at his sleeves. The darkness hides everything. The flooded ditches, the broken dikes, the soft spots that can swallow a man whole. Only the smell gives warning, a foul, earthy stench rising from pits of disturbed sediment. "Grover!" he calls softly. A strained voice answers, shivering. "Here, Lieutenant, I can't feel my legs." They find him moments later, trapped in a hidden pit, nearly invisible beneath the black water. His arms tremble as he clings to a broken fence post. The mud rises and falls around him like something alive. Mercer flattens himself on a salvaged door plank. "Rope!" he hisses. The men work in silence, their breath fogging in the cold. The rope is thrown. Grover's numb hands fumble but latch on. "On my mark," Blythe whispers. 1, 2, 3. They pull. The mud refuses. It clings to Grover like claws. Again, again. With a sickening, sucking roar, the marsh finally releases him. Grover collapses on the plank, sobbing with relief as the others drag him to higher ground. The Canadians have barely saved one man. But farther west, German patrols are not so fortunate. In the darkness beyond the Canadian line, Wehrmacht lanterns sway as shouts echo across the wetlands. A squad of Germans has wandered into a submerged drainage canal, and the mud takes them mercilessly. Later, a captured German report will state the truth with chilling plainness. "Ein ganzes Zug abgesunken." An entire platoon sank. But the mud is only the beginning. By dawn, the Canadians face a new problem. Their infantry cannot advance, tanks cannot move, supplies cannot reach them. Everything is drowning in mud. Major Robert Watson, commanding the field company, surveys the devastation. Barns collapsed under floodwater, orchards turned to swamps, roads erased. He mutters, "We can't fight like this. Not unless we build the ground ourselves." And so begins one of the strangest engineering feats of the Second World War. Salvaged barn beams, splintered doors, shattered pews from a half-flooded church. Anything that floats, anything that can bear weight, anything that can help the Canadians carve a path through terrain designed to swallow armies. Behind them, German artillery begins to rumble again. The warning that time is running out. Watson looks at his exhausted men and gives the only order that makes sense. "Gentlemen, we build roads where no roads exist." October 24th, 1944. near the flooded village of Krabendike. Dawn crawls across the polders like a pale, half-frozen ghost. The sun rises not in gold, but in a dull, watery gray that reflects off the surface of every flooded field. The land is no longer land. It is a necklace of tiny, treacherous islands floating inside an endless brown sea. Major Robert Watson stands ankle-deep in mud that tugs at his boots with each breath he takes. His engineers gather around him, coughing steam into the cold morning air. "Orders from division," Watson says grimly. "Infantry must advance by nightfall. That means we need a route across this swamp before noon." The sappers stare across a landscape that defies logic. Where the map shows fields, there is only water. Where the map shows roads, there is only mud. Where the map shows barns, there are shattered roofs, floating like driftwood. Corporal Desmond Shaw, a carpenter before the war, mutters under his breath, "Sir, you could lose a battleship in that muck." Watson doesn't disagree. But the Canadians don't have the luxury of waiting. The entire 1st Canadian Army is stalled behind them. Supplies, ammunition, casualty evacuation. Every meter gained in the Scheldt costs blood, and now the mud threatens to cost far more. He points toward the skeleton of a collapsed farmhouse. "Salvage that timber. Everything that's wood goes with us." The first teams move quickly. Every blow of an axe rings through the cold morning. Every beam torn from a flooded barn splashes into the mud like a sacrifice. Mercer and 3 other sappers wade into the ruined church on the edge of the village. The stained glass is shattered, the pews submerged. Sunlight flickers through the broken roof, illuminating floating hymn books and twisted rafters. Shaw peers down at a pew drifting in knee-deep water. "You sure about this, Lieutenant?" Blythe nods. "If it holds a Dutch farmer during Sunday Mass, it'll damn well hold a Canadian rifleman." They drag the pews out into the muddy daylight, stacking them alongside barn beams and smashed doors. The piles grow, not elegant, not uniform, but solid, primitive, desperate, perfect. By mid-morning, the engineers begin constructing their first corduroy road, a crude path made by laying logs and planks side by side across the mud, turning liquid earth into something that can bear weight. Shaw drives a stake into the ground, only to watch it vanish into the muck. He shakes his head. "This stuff eats wood for breakfast." "Then we feed it more," Mercer replies, slamming another beam beside him. 5 men lift a barn door, 3 others lay down a pew. Then 2 men anchor it with scavenged beams. The structure stabilizes, a narrow, trembling spine stretching over a bottomless bog. A test run is needed. Sergeant Frank Dalhousie volunteers. He steps onto the first plank. The wood creaks, the mud burbles. The entire platform shifts like a living raft. But it holds. Dalhousie walks 10 meters, 20, then 30. Farther than anyone dared hope. He turns around, raises both arms, and shouts, "Holy hell! It works!" Cheers erupt behind him. Even Watson, normally unshakable, allows a small smile. But the moment is fragile. A distant whistle slices through the air. Incoming. A German 88 shell crashes into the flooded orchard to their left, sending up a geyser of mud and water. The shockwave hits like a punch. One sapper is knocked flat. Another staggers, clutching his ears. "Back to work!" Watson roars. "That fire only gets heavier." The sappers throw themselves into the task. Every minute matters. Every plank can save a life. Every meter of road can keep the offensive alive. By noon, a rough but usable path stretches across the marsh, a trembling, crooked line of salvaged wood that defies the landscape itself. And then something extraordinary happens. A German observation post radios an urgent message to regimental command. "Die Kanadier gehen. Über nichts." The Canadians are moving. Over nothing. The enemy cannot see the corduroy road beneath the floodwater. To them, it appears as though Canadian infantry are walking on the surface of the swamp. But the truth is more remarkable. Engineers have rebuilt the land itself. Still, the day is far from over. As Blythe wipes the mud from his face, he hears a shout from the far end of the new road. "Lieutenant! The mud's shifting again! We've got a collapse!" Blythe curses under his breath, grabs his kit, and runs. The Scheldt is not beaten. It never is. Every inch gained by the Canadians can be taken back by the mud in a heartbeat. The battle is not just against the Germans. It is against the earth itself. October 25th, 1944. Forward edge of Zuid-Beveland. The wind rises again by mid-afternoon, slashing across the polders with a ferocity that makes the mud ripple like a disturbed pond. Every gust brings the smell of brine from the North Sea and the distant echo of artillery rolling across the drowned fields. Lieutenant Gordon Blythe sprints along the trembling corduroy track, each step sending vibrations down the fragile line of barn beams and broken pews. Ahead, 3 sappers are already on their knees, clawing at the edges of a sinking section. Corporal Shaw looks up, panic in his eyes. "Sir, the whole segment's dropping. We hit a soft vein." Blythe kneels beside him. The mud beneath the planks is shifting. Not gradually, but violently, as if the entire swamp has come alive. One moment the road sits firm. The next, half a meter of its length is swallowed whole, gurgling like a drowning animal. "Reinforce with the long beams," Blythe orders. Mercer wades in, hauling a 10-foot section of salvaged timber on his shoulder. 2 others follow. They slam the beams down perpendicular to the sinking area, hoping to spread the weight. But the mud continues to sag. Dalhousie curses. "This damn swamp knows we're here." Blythe feels it too. The uncanny sensation that the mud is not simply passive terrain, but a hostile force. The Germans aren't shooting. Not right now. They don't have to. The ground is killing Canadians more efficiently than shrapnel. By the time the section stabilizes, night is approaching fast. Visibility collapses into a haze of mist rolling off the saturated earth. The world becomes a battlefield of silhouettes, ruined farmhouses, broken trees, abandoned carts, all half submerged. Major Watson arrives, boots coated in a heavy armor of wet clay. "It'll rain tonight," he says grimly. "That'll turn half this line into soup again." Shaw wipes his brow. "How the hell did the Germans move through this?" "They didn't," Watson replies. "That's why they dug in so deep. They don't maneuver here. They just survive." Blythe adds quietly, "And they know every ditch, every pit, every channel. We don't." For a moment, the men fall silent. The wind whistles through the hollow beams, sounding almost like voices. Then Watson straightens. "All right. New plan. We're building 2 parallel tracks. If one sinks, the other carries the infantry." The sappers exchange looks. Double the work, double the materials, no extra time. But none object. As darkness settles like a heavy cloak, lanterns flicker to life along the line. Their dull yellow glow reflects off pools of standing water, creating shimmering halos that dance across the mud. The sappers begin scavenging again. Doors from a drowned Dutch farmhouse, the frame of a ruined wagon, shelves ripped from a half-collapsed storehouse, even the wooden top of an old organ from the church sacristy. Nothing is sacred in war, not when men's lives depend on the weight of a plank. Meanwhile, to the northeast, German soldiers of the battalion Huber attempt their own midnight movement across a flooded dikeway. A captured diary later describes the horror. "Wir traten in den Schlamm, und verschlang uns." We stepped into the mud, and it swallowed us. Shouts erupt across the dark marsh. Lanterns sway wildly. Some men sink to their waists, others vanish to their shoulders. In one spot near a collapsed sluice gate, 3 Germans drown before help can reach them. Only a few hundred meters away, the Canadians hear everything, but cannot see through the fog. Mercer whispers, "Jesus, it's eating them alive." Blythe nods quietly. "And tomorrow, if we fail, It'll do the same to us. The night shift continues. The sappers work with numb fingers, breath frosting in front of their faces. The rain begins around midnight, a slow, deliberate patter that quickly grows into sheets of water hammering the marsh. The ground trembles. The newly built road seems to rise and fall like a raft on stormy seas. One section lifts as another sinks. The men shout warnings, adjusting beams, hammering stakes, dropping planks, all while lightning crackles over the distant sea. The mud becomes a battlefield all its own. A sinkhole appears out of nowhere, a circular pool of swirling brown water that engulfs an entire stack of timber. It disappears with a wet hiss. Shaw stares in disbelief. "There goes tomorrow's road," Watson only sighs. "We'll find more." And they always do, because there is no other choice. By dawn, the two parallel corduroy roads stretch farther into the flooded wasteland. They shudder with each footstep, but they hold. For the first time in days, infantry companies begin to move forward, cautiously, rifles slung, boots probing the planks. Sergeant Dalhousie watches them pass. "If any of those boys slip off the edge, they're gone." Blythe nods. "Then we make the edges wider." He turns to his sappers. "Another layer. Reinforce every meter. The Germans won't stop us, and the mud won't either." Their work is far from finished, because ahead lies the worst part of the Scheldt, the deep pockets around Hooftplatte, where entire German units vanished beneath the earth. And now the Canadians must go there next. October 27th, 1944. Approaches to Hooftplatte, Western Scheldt. Morning breaks with an eerie silence. No artillery, no machine gun bursts, no rifle crack echoing across the polders. Only the steady, unnatural sound of wind skimming over waterlogged earth. The landscape here looks less like a battlefield and more like the aftermath of a biblical flood. The corduroy roads behind them tremble under every footfall, but they have held long enough for full infantry platoons to advance. Now the engineers must expand the route toward Hooftplatte, where the marshlands deepen and where Allied intelligence warns, "The mud can swallow horses." Lieutenant Gordon Blythe scans the horizon. What should be farmland is now a churning mosaic of brown water and floating debris. Fence posts stick out like drowned fingers. Half a windmill stands crooked in the distance, the rest consumed by the swamp. Private Mercer mutters, "Feels like we're walking on the spine of some dead animal." Blythe doesn't respond. He feels it too, the sensation that this ground was never meant for human feet. Forward patrols radio back grim news. A reconnaissance corporal kneels over a half-buried object and brushes away the mud. It's a helmet. German. Still attached to something beneath. The mud does not release it. Farther ahead, two infantrymen find an abandoned MG-34 nest, the weapon half-submerged, its bipod twisted, the gunner's corpse buried so deeply that only a sleeve remains visible above the muck. Sergeant Dalhousie spits into the mud. "If a whole machine gun team can disappear here, what chance does a column have?" Major Watson approaches with a small map, smeared and nearly useless. "The Germans listed this area as unpassierbar," he says. "Not impassable for tanks, impassable for men." Blythe folds his arms. "So we make it passable." The engineers begin their push. They sink long beams into the mud like railway ties. They lash barn doors into wide platforms. They wedge thick timbers horizontally beneath soft spots, trying to anchor the floating earth. But the mud here is different. Deeper, heavier, greedier. An entire segment collapses under its own weight. Another is swallowed before they can secure it. The men work knee-deep, then thigh-deep, then waist-deep. Shaw attempts to place a support plank. His foot slips, and he plunges into a hidden pit. He gasps as the mud rises to his chest. "Rope! Now!" Blythe shouts. 3 men dive onto a plank, throwing him a line. Shaw's scream rips across the flatlands as he sinks another inch. "Pull!" The mud fights them, clutching Shaw with terrible strength. Pull! His legs are stuck fast, buried in cold, suffocating clay. Pull, damn it! At last, with a violent heave, he bursts free, leaving his boots behind, ripped clean off his feet. He collapses onto the plank, shaking uncontrollably. Mercer whispers, "This place wants us dead." By afternoon, the German guns awaken. A shell lands 50 meters to the north, erupting into a fountain of water and mud. The shockwave knocks 2 infantrymen off the corduroy track. One is pulled back immediately, but the second sinks so fast the others barely reach him. As they drag him free, he coughs out mud and water, eyes wild with terror. "It grabbed me," he gasps. "It pulled." Watson clenches his jaw. "Engineers, double time. We need stability before nightfall." The sappers throw themselves into the task with renewed desperation. Thunder rolls overhead. Rain returns, heavy, cold, relentless. The corduroy track grows longer, wider, stronger. But with every meter they build, the swamp swallows another piece of their strength. Near sunset, a strange sight emerges through the fog. A line of German helmets drifting in the shallows, still attached to bodies trapped beneath the surface. A few rifles protrude like drowned reeds. Blythe forces his eyes away. This is what awaits the Canadians if the road fails. A voice echoes from the left flank. "Sir, we found a structure." The sappers hurry over and discover the remains of a stone culvert, thick, ancient, and still partially intact beneath the water. It's solid, immovable, a blessing. Watson kneels to examine it. "This can anchor the entire crossing." He stands. "Gentlemen, we just found our way forward." Excitement, brief, fragile, ripples through the ranks. They reinforce the culvert with beams. They lash planks across its surface. They use it as a hardpoint from which to drive deeper into the marsh. The Canadians finally have something the mud cannot swallow. As night falls, a chilling message crackles through German lines. "Die Kanadier bauen Straßen über das Wasser." The Canadians are building roads on top of the water. But the mud is not finished with them. Because beyond Hoofdplaat lies the deepest, deadliest section of the entire Scheldt, the place where entire German companies disappeared, where the earth itself consumed battalions like a living creature. And that is where the Canadians must push next. October 29th, 1944, the drowned expanse. West of Hoofdplaat, darkness hangs low, pressed against the flooded earth like the lid of a coffin. There is no sunrise, only a slow gray swelling of light that reveals a landscape flattened by water and war. The Canadians move forward in single file, each step measured, each breath visible in the cold morning air. The corduroy road stretches behind them like a scar across the marsh. Ahead, the land vanishes into a wide, shimmering void where the mud becomes indistinguishable from the water. This is the zone the Germans called Die Versinkungsfelder, the sinking fields. Lieutenant Gordon Blythe has heard the stories. Whole German platoons disappearing in minutes, supply teams swallowed in silence. A company commander found days later, preserved waist-deep in muck, hands still gripping binoculars. Now those same lands lie before the Canadians. Private Mercer tightens the straps on his kit as he follows the new, wider corduroy platform. He mutters, "If hell had a shoreline, this would be it." Ahead, the 1st Infantry platoons advance cautiously, rifles slung, eyes scanning the murky expanse. Every step on the planks sends ripples across the waterlogged earth. Somewhere far to the west, hidden by fog, German machine guns open fire. A probing burst. Rounds skip across the flooded fields, leaving tiny fountains. Sergeant Dalhousie ducks instinctively. They're trying to see if we'll panic, testing our footing. But the Canadians don't panic. They do not run. Because running means stepping off the road, and stepping off the road is death. Major Watson kneels beside the newest section. Two lines of timber now run parallel, reinforced with vertical stakes driven deep into the earth using sledgehammers and improvised pilings. The structure rises just enough above the waterline that the infantry can advance without sinking. Shaw and Mercer wedge one last beam into place. It groans, but holds. "Sir," Mercer says quietly, "this whole damn road is floating." Watson nods. "That's the idea. If the ground won't hold us, we hold ourselves." At midday, a messenger from the North Shore New Brunswick Regiment arrives breathlessly. "They're pinned down," he pants. "We can't flank. Floods on both sides." Watson doesn't hesitate. "Extend the track. Get them a lane." The sappers push forward with renewed urgency, working elbow-deep in sludge. Plank by plank, beam by beam, door by shattered door. The rain begins again, a cold, stinging drizzle that blurs the horizon. Ahead, fog lifts just enough to reveal a grotesque sight. Half a dozen German bodies trapped upright in the mud, preserved like statues by the swamp. Some still have rifles slung at their shoulders. Others are leaning in unnatural positions, as if reaching for help that never came. Blythe forces himself to look, to know what the Canadians face. "We keep moving," he orders, because stopping means the same fate. As the engineers push closer to the German lines, artillery begins to fall. Shells plunge into the marsh with a sickening slap, spraying mud like shrapnel. But the soft ground absorbs the blasts, an unexpected blessing. One round lands only 10 meters from Blythe. Instead of erupting, it sinks into the mud with a muted thump and vanishes. Mercer's eyes widen. "That should have killed us." Blythe exhales shakily. "The mud takes lives, but today it gave one back." By late afternoon, the corduroy road reaches a long, narrow dike that rises above the flooded fields. It's held by a small German rear guard, cold, exhausted, barely able to stand. Their boots are mudlocked, their machine gun half submerged. When the Canadians approach, the Germans fire a short, weak burst, then silence. One German soldier stands slowly, hands trembling. "Wir können nicht mehr," he whispers. "We cannot go on." Behind them, Mercer notices a horrifying detail. Some of the German soldiers are missing boots entirely. The mud tore them off as they tried to retreat. Dalhousie murmurs, "This land isn't fighting for them anymore." The Germans surrender without a further shot, not because of the Canadians alone, but because the Scheldt itself has broken them. The last phase of the engineering push begins as the evening turns to deep blue twilight. The final 2 kilometers toward the causeways must be reinforced. Heavy infantry traffic will follow. The sappers move as if possessed, hammering planks, driving stakes, wrenching beams from flooded barns and shoving them into place. Their hands raw, faces caked in dark clay. Boots so heavy with mud that every step feels like dragging a corpse. They do not stop. They cannot, because behind them, 3rd Canadian Division depends entirely on the path they build. Night falls in absolute silence. No shells, no gunfire. Only the peculiar hush of wind across water. Blythe watches the moon rise over the flooded lands. The new corduroy road stretches behind him for nearly a mile, glowing faintly in the pale light. It looks impossible. A wooden highway floating on death. Then Dalhousie speaks softly. "Sir, look." Infantry companies move in perfect silence along the planks, line after line, shadow after shadow, advancing across terrain where entire German companies drowned only days before. Mercer whispers, almost reverently, "They're walking on roads that don't exist." Blythe exhales, voice hoarse. "No, they exist because we built them." November 2nd, 1944. The last of the Scheldt crossings are secured. Canadian sappers stand caked in mud up to their waists, exhausted beyond words, staring back at the impossible path they carved through the drowned world. Behind them lie the broken remains of German battalions that vanished into the swamp. Ahead lies Antwerp, the port that will feed the Allied armies. The engineers do not celebrate. They simply breathe. They survived a battlefield that killed without bullets. They defeated an enemy that had swallowed armies whole. They fought a landscape that wanted them dead. And they won.